Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee, the whole meeting for August 13th, 2018. Mrs. Bonifield is running a little late and she will be joining us very shortly. For those of you in the audience, if you want to follow along with our agenda, you can step out to the back door and to the right. There's a table and you can pick up an agenda. For those of you watching at home, if you want to follow along, you can go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and you will see the agendas and you can drop down and follow along with us. The Committee of the Whole meeting is a meeting where we will discuss items. This is not a voting meeting, but items will be presented to the board tonight, and you'll probably hear a lot of discussions, a lot of questions on the items that will become before the board. Items that the board feels are ready for a vote will then be put on our regular meeting and our agenda for next week. So we will jump right into our agenda, and our first item is audience communications. I do not see anyone in the audience coming up or rushing to the microphone to address us. If you do want to address us, there are blue slips outside by the agendas. And seeing none, we will then move on to the Committee of the Whole. Mrs. Oquist, I do not have anything. Do you have anything for the Committee of the Whole?
I do not, President Johnson. Thank you.
All right, that'll move us on to item 3, Building and Site, and Mr. Centers.
Absolutely. The first item on Building and Site is digital signage, part of the 2013 bond, and Mr. Francis will speak to us regarding that.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Digital signage, I would like to just begin with maybe referencing back to the memo that we had. It's perhaps not my favorite phrasing because it's confusing most of the time, and I know when we first started discussing it, I and others were thinking that this was like one of the digital scrolling signs out at the curb or front of a school. It's not. Digital signage actually refers to a actual television screen and a certain media player in order to turn that television into a sign that is digitized inside the building. I think at this time what I'd like to do is actually ask Mr. Tim Klan, he's our Administrator of Information and Educational Technology, to come on up, and the two of us can discuss. We also have representatives from Barton Mallow with us who are our IT consultants when it comes to the bond work. This is a proposed bond purchase, so I want to just walk you through it briefly, and if there's questions, we can answer those for you, and we'll go from there. So very quickly, we have the bid we presented to you, as you can see in the bid package and award summary, that we have a 4K, which is, there's 1080, and then 4K is actually a better resolution. That was an alternate bid on this pack. So the reason that we were going with it was because for the dollars increase, it's actually the most current, up-to-date technology, so we feel like we'd get a longer lasting product, if you will, with regard to resolution, et cetera. The original budget was approximately $200,000. We came in so far under on the bid that we were comfortable looking at the alternate. You will see that we have the 4K televisions, and they are 65-inch flat screens. That's going to be the common sizing through the buildings. Mr. Klan can talk to the due diligence that we did with regard to the buildings themselves and where they want them placed. If you want to take a second to explain how the buildings were involved with that.
Yes, we originally had locations designated in the renovation as we did the renovation, so that we pull wire and things to those locations. But in addition to that, Barton Mallow met with each of the buildings as we were looking into this project to verify those locations, and in some cases change them to a new location within the building, depending on what the principals, how they wanted to use those signs and where they thought the best placement of those would be. So
we're looking at 3 per high school, 2 at the middle schools and upper elementaries, and then 1 at the K4s and other buildings. Essentially, most buildings, correct me if I'm wrong, all the buildings have 1 up towards the front. of the building, like in a lobby area, et cetera. We do have an alternate bid for a 49-inch if we need a slightly smaller screen to go into a smaller area. As an example, like the secured vestibule, if you wanted one posted in there, then you wouldn't want quite as large of a screen based upon the size of your vestibule. Another piece of this in the bid is the what we're calling the media player. So the screens, the televisions, actually are part of the bid is also the media player that turns the TV into this digital solution. I don't know if you want to just give a brief setup of how that would work.
Yeah, so the media player attaches to the television and is what communicates with the software that turns it into the digital sign. So that can be attached to any television to turn it into a sign. So I think that what you were headed towards is the mobile, adding that media player or one extra media player per building that we can attach to the mobile carts that we put into the buildings, similar to what we have over here in the boardroom. Every building has 2 of those, so in theory, they can attach this mobile device to one of those, and since that is wireless and wherever, they could technically roll that out into the main lobby during an event and use
Community
that as a
room,
sign.
anything in the hallway, they can. Therefore, what we're really looking at here is all K4s would have 2 options, 2 digital signs. The upper L's and the middle schools would technically have 3, and the high schools would have 4. Each of those, 1 each being a mobile one. And we did also get unit pricing on the bid, so that if a school desires another, we have the price. So if they say, look, we've got a budget, or we've got a PTA, we've got whatever that would like to purchase an extra one, we have the unit pricing on that as well.
Just for the sake of, I know the board has this in front of them on the bid tabulation, but for the sake of the audience, could you talk a little bit about the price differential between the 1080p and the 4K solution, so that when you said we're within our overall budget, could you just talk a little bit about the differential between the two and why it made sense to go with that purchase?
Yeah, the base bid amount for the 1080p solution was $57,660. The base bid amount for the 4K solution was $64,100. So really, there was a pretty small difference there between the two in order to get us up to that 4K solution, which again, on a digital sign that you're looking at, you or I may not be able to tell the difference looking at the two, but I think it buys us some longevity in the devices moving forward, since everything right now is kind of moving towards the 4K anyway. As things happen in the future, or if we need to replace anything, we'll still have an all 4K solution.
And then just to clear up all the dollars on it, the alternate for the additional media players that would turn the mobile devices into this same solution was $13,500. So that brings us to $77,636.
And part of the reason that we came in so far under bid, or under the budget, was that 4 years ago, I think, when this was budgeted, I don't think anybody really had an idea of what was going to be available now and what the cost would be on that. And with these solutions, it can go pretty much as high as you want. Depending on what people, when we got to this point, said we need to have this, and this, those numbers can go up very quickly. But we found some really solid solutions that will do everything that we need, and in that 4K resolution for a really good price, so.
And we did have 6 bidders, so we had nice bid coverage as well. Any other questions?
Yes, Mrs. Burton.
I assume that, take the high school, for example, they could put up one series of messages, and it would appear on all 3 or 4 screens, however many we had. Is that correct?
Right.
As opposed to each one could have different messages on them.
It can do all that. So they can schedule it so that at certain times of the day, say in the morning, all 3 televisions around, or all 3 signs around the building are displaying the same things, but at lunchtime, the one in the cafeteria is displaying lunch information, or so they can be scheduled to all be displaying the same thing, or at different times of day and in different locations showing different information, and different people can have control over that. So the lunch lunch people could have control over what shows at lunch, and the office can have control over what shows in the morning, and then during the day, it can just be regular things that come out of any, so multiple people have access to.
And that's web-based.
And it's all web-based,
So it's not,
right?
standing there with
Right.
a pad in your
Device.
hand, staring at it, doing it, it's all web-based.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. I believe our Bart Miller rep had a comment.
Yes.
Your comment?
Yes, I did have one comment. There are two sizes of displays that have been allocated. Typically, what you're going to see is the larger displays will be in the higher locations. So something that's going to be out of reach primarily will be a larger screen. That'll be a 65. Those 49-inch displays will be more in the entryways, hallways, where people can stand in the middle and see them closely. They won't be that same size.
Great. Good to know. Any other comments or questions, Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Couple of questions. When we talk about the media players, is it only, if you have three, like at the high schools, do you only need one media player, or does each screen have one?
Yeah, one per television. It's just a small box that attaches to the back of the television.
Okay.
So they would run, therefore they could run independently. Also, that's why we have the alternate for an additional media player for each building, because then they could take that and attach it to their mobile cart to turn that into an extra one. So each TV would get its own media player.
We're talking about digital signage, but are these screens able to display more than signage? In other words, can they show a television station, for instance?
Yes, yeah, the signage solutions also have the ability to do video. So you could have, the high schools could have clips from Friday night's football game showing at different times as part of it. And you can divide up the screen in several different ways so that you could have, video clips showing up here and still have a ticker or things scrolling along the bottom and other information showing. You can break up the screen and display pretty much whatever you want, at whatever kind of schedule you'd like, so.
And who do we envision having control of the display?
Who's programming it?
Who's programming it, who puts
Right.
on there?
My anticipated, what I assumed was going to happen would be probably someone in the office, either the secretaries to make changes to the daily information that's out there, or administrators. The athletic department could have access to it.
Be a building decision, basically,
yeah.
on who should and would have access to be able to go on to the internet and make those changes. And I think that something like a high school, which has far more activities and has more television displays, that probably will get allocated, again, as the building sees fit. Athletic director at some points, the student activities at other points could be, as an example, at any of the three high schools, perhaps they had a play either coming up or just finished the weekend before. You could either run video after, or you could advertise for it before, selling of tickets through student council for something. There's a lot, or they could come up with a system. I mean, if it were me and I was at the building, I'd set up a system so I didn't have 12 different people changing things on the screens, set up a system for what's the message that you
Right.
want, we're gonna funnel it through this key person, things like that.
And since you can break up what's displayed when and break up the screen into different areas, for instance, at Churchill, Kappa could have a section that shows during lunch and after school that they have control over to update. And so if they update it, whatever their current information is will show out there. If they don't, it'll be whatever information was up there before. But at the same time, displaying on that screen could be, nightly activities that the office updates, and they change that. So everybody has control over their own part of that system, so they can share the burden, I guess, or whatever, of having to keep it up to date, the privilege of keeping it up to
There you
date.
go.
Because that is, you want to make sure that it's not, you always want to make sure that information is current up there, so.
Okay, and that leads me to additional questions. You said it's web-based,
Yes.
right? So is there one central location within each school where that information would be submitted or input, or could anyone that had a Chromebook or a computer access that to put information onto it?
So each of the departments, so athletics or whatever, would have a login, that they would use, and they would just go to a website. They go to the web address, they log in, and it would give them rights to their section of that
But it's
system
secured,
to
so you'd
change.
have to have a
Okay,
username
that's,
and
that's
password.
where I'm going, is
It's secured.
Yeah.
So,
You've got
so just because
security.
you walk in with an iPad and you look up at it and start doing it, you'd
Yeah.
have to have the login.
You assign a different login to each group, and you only assign rights to them to make changes to that particular area of the,
But then they could access it from any computer, not
Right.
just in the school.
Right.
yes.
So if
They
they
could
were
change it
home
at
and they
home.
wanted to, coming in for Monday morning, show the clips from the weekend's game or
Sure.
play or whatever, you could have it set up and timed out so that it would be going, you could do that on a Saturday afternoon instead of waiting to come in early on a Monday.
So long as you had the login information, the password,
Right.
and that type of thing.
Right, so I could see an athletic director as an example at any of the high schools, perhaps on a
Don't they
Sunday,
take the weekends off?
putting it in, they don't take any of their days off. Putting in something as an example and getting it ready to be available on a Monday morning. Or even if the principal found out some information, late on a Friday, they could have it ready to be up and displayed as students walk in first thing in the morning.
That's all I had, Mr. Signage.
Thank you. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. Would this be operated under a closed-circuit type system? So, for example, Churchill's video clips would only be shown in Churchill? Or would it be able to be accessed from outside? For example, if a Churchill student wanted to log in or somehow access it from home, could they do that?
No, it's just within, as far as I understand it, just within the building, specific to that building and only to those video players.
All right, so this is definitely a closed thing. My other thought is just to make sure that on our disclosure statements, that we include that when the families sign off for video releases that, or, photographic release, that this is included as well.
Good point. Mrs. Burns?
So it's my understanding that it would just be staff members that would be given
Yeah, students shouldn't
access,
have
and
logins.
not even all staff would have that. It would be
Right.
specified personnel
Right.
within the
This is akin to your
website.
you're
Yeah.
updating our LPS website. Everybody, you can do it from anywhere, but not everybody has access to it. There should only be a couple people with that username and password, that login.
Yep.
It's a secured site to be able to change.
Sounds good.
All right, if nothing else, let's move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for-
Thank you very much.
Thank you for Barton Mallow being here. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Oh, Dan, we're voting on this.
Please. I have, if you bear with me, I've got a few things that I want to pass out for the next letter B.
Yeah, letter B will be Ford Skill Center demolition.
Okay, take one
Take
each
one,
and pass.
take one and pass it,
I can do
and
that.
then keep that train going.
Sure.
And then take
Andre,
one
one
and
was
pass it.
passing. Do you anticipate that elementary schools using it like the high schools do? The high schools have so many people coming in and out of the building, but
Right.
elementaries don't really as much. Do you anticipate them
You know, I
utilizing it at the same
anticipate
rate?
that they
or-
would use it similarly to how they might use an outdoor sign
Yeah.
with some activities that are coming up, information for parents when they drop off students or coming in and out for
PTA
SAC,
meeting
and PTA information. What I would anticipate is it may not change on a daily basis as it may at a secondary school. And then they may also reserve a section simply for highlights, pictures and things of that nature. But I do think that the access of the alternative media player and being able to hook that onto one of the mobile carts will be very helpful, because there may be an activity, for instance, taking place in the LMC, and obviously that's not where the signage would be on a daily basis. It would most likely be in the lobby for an elementary school. But that way, you could give very clear direction for, let's say, a curriculum night or open house, either in the gym or in the library, and it could display that. So really for a relatively minimal amount, because that's not a per unit cost, as I know you know, that's a total cost, to be able to add that and have one more device that's mobile. I would imagine, having been a former elementary principal, utilizing that quite a bit.
Okay.
So I think that was a great alternate option for us.
So letter B is the Ford Skill Center demolition. As everyone is aware, that the property is currently under a purchase agreement, and one of the responsibilities for the district is to raise the building. So we had the bid out, and we got good coverage. We had 6 bidders put in for it, and we were actually quite pleased with the number with regard to, and I know it's a lot of money, but don't forget that this is a 2-story building. Start there. It's a large building. So we just did clay recently, and I know the last few buildings that have been demolished were all elementary schools. So this is a larger building, and of course you have to do the appropriate abatement and environmental items. So we were actually pleased with the outcome of the bids. Something I want to walk the board through. I know that you didn't have this information in your packet because some of the due diligence and other information was occurring in towards the end of last week. So if I can walk you through, I actually created a memo today that updates and gives some information off of my original memo from last week that you all had in your hand was really more generalized of we'll be bringing it in. There's also a memo from Mr. Lau, the Administrator of Facilities and Operations, and you have the bid tab. So really, if you're looking at the bid tab, there's 2 bidders that were under the 600,000 amount, and those were the 2 that we did some due diligence with, mainly because the lowest bidder was unknown to us and also unknown to our NTH, which is our civil engineering consultants who helped draw the specs for the demolition. So we did the due diligence process, interviewed, did references, and ultimately, as I state in my memo, we do want to recommend the bidder who was not the lowest straight number, but the second lowest number, and it was only higher by a little less than $6,500. And I have a couple of reasons for that. Reason one, and frankly, to me, reason enough, is that Salem Bean is the one we're recommending. We've used them. We have a working relationship with them. Salem Bean took down McKinley. Salem Bean took down Clay recently. Salem Bean took it down in an expedited schedule that we put on them because of the timelines that were in the purchase agreement with Clay and the time of year, et cetera, and they met them. So they have the capacity, they have the manpower. We were pleased with their work, and so in that alone versus, and again, this isn't a knock on the lowest bidder. West side of the state, we don't know them, we haven't used them, and from our research, they mostly do state projects and things like that, not necessarily schools. So we felt for the amount increase, which is really fractional, off of a $550,000 bid item, we're talking less than $6,500 difference. And we get to that number, not to be confused, because this is another piece that I wanted to bring up. During the due diligence, it was a discussion and interview occurs, and what was found is that both of the low bidders had priced in topsoil, and we were not in need of that. So both gave us a credit, and Salem Bean's credit was $2,000 more than the credit from the low bidder. So it took what was almost an $8,500 difference, which still was in our mind enough to be appropriate, and brought it down to less than $6,500. Another reason, and as we discussed at the study session last week, the Buckeye pipeline that is in the ground running in a diagonal manner southwest to northeast on the property that we have to have removed. Salem Bean is an excavating company. They have no problem doing that type of work. We did not put that excavation into the bid process or in the bid specs because we didn't want just any demolition company to then sub it out. We wanted to be able to choose the company to remove that pipe. Well, Salem Bean is an excavating company. This is what they do. And in fact, they've given us a bid. We asked them for what it would cost for them to remove it, and their bid is lower than any of the bids we had to date as we were doing our due diligence and trying to find out what's this going to cost us to do. And they came in as the lowest thus far in our due diligence. And while that's not an item that necessarily has to go through an official bid process because it is a service, I like the idea of them, A, being a company that we would trust doing the job, and B, that there are a low quote on the job. So it's something that we could potentially, if the board chooses, you don't have to, but it's a nice option to say the same company that's out there doing the demolition on this property could also take care of that next piece, which is the removal of the pipe. So all of those combined, all those items and reasons combined, give me the recommendation to the board and to the superintendent of Salem being the appropriate recommended vendor.
Any questions, comments?
I went on a little long there, sorry, but it was all new information, so.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
So, I'm probably gonna muddy the waters here a little bit, but, if we take the project as a whole, we take the demolition and the pipeline and put them together. We're not gonna put them together, but
Right.
is the cost difference enough from Salem being the lowest bidder on that? Because there's probably some, cost savings that they're gonna be there anyway?
Well, to be fair to the two that we did our due diligence on, the lowest dollar amount and the second lowest, which was Salem Bean, we asked them both to quote out. We didn't want to just ask Salem Bean and not ask it. We asked them both to date, and grant you, it's just been, a handful of days.
Yeah.
They said they're going to return a number, so we haven't gotten a number from them.
Okay.
I can't go apples to apples
Okay.
on that.
yeah,
I can
yeah.
only go off of the other quotes that I had.
Okay.
So just to be clear, if the board chose to do that, they could do that as part of a process moving forward. Tonight, we would be bringing you only the demolition of the skill center. What I will say is the quote that Salem Bean has given our operations department for the excavation of the pipeline is considerably lower than any of the other independent quotes that they had gotten along the way.
Okay.
So if, I'm sure they are looking at some economies of scale when you're
Right.
out there and you're
Yeah.
doing
You're
that
already
work, as opposed to a company simply coming in
Yep.
and doing that. But it was considerably lower than the other quotes that our department had received. But tonight, we would just simply
We're
be
just-
bringing you the recommendation for raising the school, which we are required to do as part of the purchase agreement. And it also leaves the board the option to have that same company through either a change order process, moving forward to be able to add on that additional excavating work should the board so choose. And you can make that determination once we get the other company to share their quote.
And I would just like to say, I agree with hiring Salem Bean, even though they're the second lowest bidder. We have had problems in the past with, I believe, some of our demolition companies, which has caused some great stress to our community and extra added costs to the school district. So even though the other bidder on the other side of the state may be equally able to provide the service to us, I think going with someone who knows us, knows what we're doing, and that we've worked with is a reasonable, to take them as the bidder.
Anyone else?
Okay. So this I would ask for next week.
Okay. All right. Moving on to item C. Item C is the Stevenson High School practice field.
So Stevenson High School practice field is a project that we put out to bid. We had two bidders, and you can see from Mr. Lau's memo that there's quite a bit of difference between the two bids. I will, first of all, back up for those, I know we talked last week together at the study session, but for those viewing at home and wondering what I'm talking about with regard to a practice field, if you can envision the plot of grass that's between the baseball field and the football field, and just to the north of the softball field, if I'm thinking of that correctly, there is a plot that actually the students do use for practice area. It's not graded, it's not irrigated, it's not lined, but they use that. We're going to take that piece of land at 120 by 60 yards, basically a size of a football field, and the bid was essentially to put some drainage in and grade it and give it a crown and put irrigation in and top dress it and then put hydro seed on. And Stevenson High School is well aware that that would be going on. The plan would be for that to go on this fall. And based upon how the grass takes. That's why we're putting in irrigation, so we can make sure that it's properly watered. When that field comes in, then we would stripe it up, and it would be a practice facility for just an additional area. One of the drivers of this is as the board approved earlier in the year, or I guess now that was last school year, since we flipped over, there's going to be a unified lacrosse team in the district, and that's going to be housed at Stevenson High School. So we want to make sure that they have a sport that's occurring on their practice facilities that the others at the current time don't have. We want to at least give one more option. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a lacrosse field, but it's a field that would give them one more in the rotation at Stevenson High School. So with that said, a quick explanation, because my first question was, why was one inflated or is one really low? And just so you know, in context, that, get my name, S&D Field Services, who has the low bid of $49,322, they actually bid precisely what was in the packet. And the other group, which has a much larger number, had put in extra finger drains. They put in extra pea stone and fabric, and they added a lot of excavating to the land. So, of course, when you have all that more work, it's going to cost more. S&D, actually, we use S&D. We used them at McKinley recently to do the field there. We didn't add irrigation at that point, so it was less. But they also did the area at McKinley, top dressed it, gave it a crown, put the hydrants in. So they're familiar with Livonia. We're familiar with them. They had a good feel for what we were asking for because they had recently done a little bit smaller version of this job. So that's the best explanation that we have, is that there's extra scope in the other one, and S&D has a good relationship and has a working knowledge of what the job was going to be, because we asked them to do something similar not too long ago. So at $49,322, it would be my recommendation to have S&D Field Services go ahead and create, or I guess, work on the field.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. My question is, do you anticipate any annual costs? I mean, after we get this put in, like who will maintain it, and will there be some annual costs like reseeding or restriping?
There certainly would be maintenance. I mean, it's a lawn that's going to get automatically beat up pretty well with regard to being used with cleats, etc. The one piece that we have abandoned years ago was irrigation on different fields. We're adding it into here for that reason. We'll have to at times roll it. We may have to seed in spots or overseed. There's certainly the irrigation will use water, and that would be an operational cost in the warmer months. So there's definitely going to be maintenance to the field, but I think that's something that we need to just embrace, may not be the right word, but if we want to have it be worth something for more than one season, we're going to have to give it a little loving.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I definitely think it can be used for lots of different activities just besides lacrosse or any other things. I'm just thinking, down the road, have we thought about who will maintain it and everything?
Right. And that would certainly be a maintenance issue. Right now, like just as an example, the baseball field, the building mows that for game days, et cetera. Okay. So they've been mowing this stretch of land because it's there, it's grass now, it's just not in perfect condition. Right. So they've been mowing it all along. We'll just have to make sure, like I said, we keep an eye on water schedules and needs, like I said, for perhaps overseeding in the fall, things like that, once it takes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mrs. Botfield.
So, Mr. Francis, are we're confident that the S&D bid is going to give us the outcome that we desire, and that the water management specialist bid was, and obviously, I don't know how much due diligence you've done with them, but do we feel that they went outside of the scope because they felt that that's what they wanted to bid and they wanted the outcome, or do you believe that they felt that extra stuff needed to be done in order to have a proper field that's gonna last
Right.
longer? I mean, I think overkill probably is. a little-
Over-engineered is the word I would probably use.
And we're confident that it's over-engineered as opposed to, we really should do it that way in order to make it work.
We walked the field, our folks walked the field with Foresight. Foresight's the group that is designing and working on the athletic field improvements that's occurring at Churchill, and that is also doing the design and oversight next year for Stevenson and Franklin. That's actually when we were walking it with them in preparation for next year. That was a piece that we had discussed, a practice field as part of that design. So there was a collaborative effort to look at it and say, where's this draining off to? What's the best solution for this field? I think we put in the bid what we believe is the appropriate amount of drainage for that area, and I don't know that we need to go any further.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Burke.
Assuming this does get approved, what is the timeline for the work to be done?
We're going to do it this fall. So I would say that once we get into September, then obviously the board would be approving. If you do approve it next week at your vote, we'll put together the paperwork and et cetera. And I would think on into September would be the time that they would start working on it. We want to make sure everything's clear out of there right now. They're finishing up some other things going on with summer work, and it'll be a fall project. That's something that the principal and the athletic director and I discussed. So it'll be an off-limits area for the fall, and then have it growing in for the spring, and we'll assess the condition of it as it grows in the spring. It very well may be that we should not be using it in the spring also, because it will be new seedlings coming in. Hydro seed, if you're familiar with, though, there's sod, there's seed, and then kind of in between is the hydro seed, where it takes a little faster than traditional seed. So we will keep an eye on it and make sure that we don't prematurely do it damage. I know they're going to be chomping the bit for space.
So the teams that currently utilize that space for practice are just going to have to not use it this fall.
And they already are, because as you know, fall sports have already begun, even though it's 95 degrees outside. So, yes, I spoke back before school let out with the principal and the athletic director, and they were very excited that it was going to be happening this fall. And at that point, they informed their fall coaches who do use it, and they're just going to put them in another area,
Make other
do a little
plans.
makeshift for the, juggle some schedules and make the fall happen.
Okay. And then, do I assume correctly that the grass, and I'll use that term loosely, that's growing there right now is going to be removed entirely? Or is?
They're going to be doing some excavating.
Excavating, yep.
So, yes,
because I know it's
gonna
kind of like any of our public fields,
Right.
that are just practice fields. It's a grass weed
Right.
combination that's kept mowed as
Yeah.
best we can and so forth. But I mean, it's not Kentucky bluegrass that's
Yes.
growing over there.
No, it'll
So-
be excavated, because they'll have to also, remember, they're gonna put in some drainage.
Yep.
They're gonna put in the irrigation, so it's gonna get dug up, it'll
Okay.
get top dressed and hydro seeded,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, level
Well,
it
and technically, it wouldn't be perfectly level, you crown a field,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it runs away.
Right.
So they'll put a little crown on it, and then they'll hydro seed it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. Mr. Francis, the irrigation system, is this like underground sprinklers?
Yes.
Do we have any other property currently that uses an irrigation system?
Right now, we've abandoned the use of irrigation, in-ground irrigation. There are still pipes coming from the building out to that area that we'll be able to tie into. And we've just made the decision that to try to keep this one going, we were going to put irrigation back into it. Because frankly, what we learned at the McKinley site was, after a season of use, if you're not able to irrigate it, it gets beat up in a hurry.
I imagine it does. Do we have the capability to maintain that ourselves, or do we need to go outside to get someone to maintain the irrigation system?
We have people that could maintain. If you have a break or a crack or something, we could have people going in there, fix a head. If it's an underground break, we can fix those.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anything else? Since the question may arise, since we are doing turf fields, synthetic turf on the playing surfaces of the current fields, this new field will be grass, and that is because the turf is quite cost prohibitive.
Right. Turf is very expensive, especially the first time you put it in. There's much more earthwork that has to occur in preparation of excavation for the land to take the turf. what we're doing currently, or what we just did at Churchill, on that field is a fraction of what would occur, because it had already been excavated and prepared back years ago when we first put the turf field on. Certainly, the playability, the longevity, et cetera, of turf, if we could put a turf field as a practice field, it would be brilliant. It really would. But that's a longer process and a longer in-depth discussion. And
Much more expensive.
Right, and it's more expensive. So right now, we've gone to this system. And I guess the next question that someone might have is, well, what happens to the other two high schools if and when lacrosse goes there? We already are looking at the idea of doing a similar project at Franklin and Churchill with some irrigation to make sure they have an extra space to be able to put into the rotation of whether that be soccer or band or lacrosse or wherever the case may be. But since this is happening now at Stevenson, we're working now at Stevenson.
Any other comments or questions? All right, that concludes item C. Item D.
Yes, if we could put that on for next.
Yes, please.
That'd be great.
Item D, Churchill and Stevenson High School dugouts. Mr. Francis, you're up again.
That is, I would like to remove that from the agenda this evening, or I don't know the official way to do so, but just to give you a quick update, that bid was due Thursday afternoon, this last Thursday afternoon. We received only one bid. We did not open it. One of the representatives from the company was here. We spoke to the gentleman, handed him his unopened bid back, and we put out an addendum to extend it into September, third week of September, so we could have some more time. Just so you understand, and so folks are wondering, what's going on with this. It's super, super, super busy right now, and the original idea was, well, it's super busy, so we'll have the job be in the fall. The problem is, companies seem to be so busy that they're not taking the time to go look at the job, to then put a bid packet together, et cetera. It's not a huge job, which might also be another factor. So our idea was, return the bid, let's hold out. Once you get past Labor Day, and probably even that first full week of September, because I think a lot of these companies are going to say, I need a breather for a couple of days. And so we extended it into September to say, here's an opportunity now to finish your summer bid work that so many companies are doing now. They're all just scrambling to beat the Labor Day, start of school, and then give them a couple-day breather, and then they still have some time. If there's really interest, I know Foresight contacted 15 different contractors for this job. A lot of them said, just can't right now. So maybe, just maybe, that's our hope. And we can't force somebody to bid, but that's our hope, is to give them a little breather, and perhaps they'll bid, and we'll get a little bit more into September. Nobody's using the baseball fields in the fall, so we're okay whether it be September, October, November. You do get to the point where the freeze comes, and we have some difficulties, but we'll keep working on it.
Great. Any questions regarding that?
So there's no action there. We'll be bringing that in the future.
All right, so item E, leases. Mr. Francis, you have some renewals for us this evening.
So I want to discuss, here, if you could pass these out. You received 5 copies of leases in your packet last week. What I'm handing you now is just an update to one of those, and there's no change other than it just specifies which rooms, actually that's not true. It excludes which rooms aren't being used by the tenant at Marshall. So it just gave it more specificity. There's no change in dollar amounts, there's no change in square footage. I just put in an exclusion, a line in the beginning on the first page stating that it's excluding X rooms, etc. So just so you can see that little bit of an update. We have 5 renewals for the 18-19 school year. I have 5 returned signed leases from them. So what I would like to be able to do is bring those next week to a vote for the board. And when the board signs them, we'll get copies back to each of those tenants, and away we go for the 18-19 school year. If there's questions about the leases, I know we discussed a little bit last week at the study session about how we're rating out with regards to what we're charging for leases, are we undercharging, are we overcharging, et cetera. And Mrs. Smith, the Director of Finance, and I did a little digging around. Frankly, as mentioned, it's very hard to get comparable data because not any schools that we were catching were having leases like we do. Everybody does building use, which so do we. You want to rent a gym, you want to rent a classroom, an auditorium, but full-on leases, there's not as much of it. But what we did is we looked sort of across what we're leasing to the different groups and made sure that they were in a comparable spot. We do have that CPI increase written into each lease, which occurred this year. We had a 2.1% CPI increase. So 4 of the 5, I shouldn't say that, 3 of the 5 had the CPI increase. 1 of the 5, if you recall, Little Tots, last year when I brought them to them, I did a 1-year lease, but a 2-year price increase, so it split it up between 2 years. So they had their automatic bump, so it brought them back up where others are at. And then 1 out of 5 had a little bit higher percentage increase because we found their price per square foot was fairly low. So we tried to bring them back up, and we sent them a letter, and we have all 5 signed and back.
So just to reiterate, you have 5 leases in the packet that you received from us on Thursday. And the second Marshall School lease, which is the last lease in here, initially said Marshall School, address consisting of approximately 19,100 square feet of space. And so Mr. Francis further delineated that because we have had some of our programming, I wouldn't say programming, some of our staff move out of that area. And it's always good to be very clear when we're leasing an area so we don't have any additional space usage that we haven't clarified with our tenants. And so you'll see on the lease that was passed out to you in the indented paragraph that it is still 19,100 square feet, but it excludes rooms 1 through 5, the LMC, the adjoining office, tech room, AV workroom, and small group room, so that there is no lack of clarity with our tenants, because we do have 2 different tenants at Marshall Elementary. So it really is just an attempt to be as clear as possible with regard to the specific areas. And in this case, it was easier to talk about the areas that were excluded as opposed to those that were included.
I started to type the other way, and I went, what am I doing?
Okay, questions? Mrs. Bonfield.
Phil, Mr. Francis, I want to thank you and your team and Mrs. Smith for taking so much time to review these leases every year. It's really something that most of the time you could just white out the rate and put the CPI rate in and move forward and just let it go because it's the same every year. But every year you bring these to us, you've re-examined the leases, you've looked at them, you've read through them. Sometimes you tweak them if you find that it's necessary. And I just really appreciate the fact that this just isn't a formality, that you take it more than just a formality and just dot the i's and cross the t's, kind of like you actually go through and make sure it's right for the district and right for our tenants and make those changes and really focus on and take the time to make sure that it's what we need rather than just rolling it over to the next year. So I appreciate that very much.
My pleasure. Anything else?
That's all I got too, so, okay.
So for next week,
You got it?
it's been a year. Do I put these all in one resolution, or do we have 5 different resolutions? I can't remember.
We can put these in one
Okay,
resolution.
great. Karen, thanks you.
So on that note, do we just want to put that on the consent agenda, or do we want this to be on the regular agenda?
I think the regular agenda.
Okay, perfect.
All right, the last item is item F, review of LPS property. Mr. Francis.
So, last week we had a discussion about property, and we wanted to bring it back for discussion again. I gave you a document last week at the study session that showed that the district has nearly 700 acres, owns 700 acres of property that we are responsible for maintaining. Obviously, the majority of that, the vast majority of that, our current programs. We have, pre, post, and K-12 educational programs across the district, and we have those buildings along with the grounds that we maintain. But we also have multiple buildings, I should say multiple properties, that we are continuing to maintain and just doing our staying on top of it, doing our due diligence with regard to properties owned by the district. We wanted to bring the conversation up, point out what we do own, what we have as land that we still maintain, and say, let's review them and get some guidance from the board with regard to maybe checking on the values of these properties, what the board would like to do with some of these properties, et cetera. I will, as a side note, remind the board that since we do maintain them and we have large plots of property, most of these, as you look at the ones that don't have LPS programs on them, are at a minimum, the smallest one on here is basically 8 acres, and it goes up towards 34 acres. We have another one that's 38 and another one that's 28. So it's a lot of land to maintain. And when it's the growing season, as we all know, it can be very difficult to keep up on. It's a manpower issue. It's a mechanical equipment issue. It's all of these things. So I just want to remind the public that we are out there working hard trying to keep these maintained, but it is very difficult to do when you're 36 square miles in size of a district and you have nearly 700 acres of land to maintain. So just a little side note on that one.
So just to extend that a bit, thank you for that introduction, Mr. Francis. The board, throughout our conversations with regard to prior property sales, and also as we go through the budget planning process every year, harks back to some of the community forums when our community first shared with us that as we took a look at financial pressures within the district, that there was a strong recommendation from our community, from our parents, from our staff, from our stakeholders, that the district continue to look at the opportunity for revenue enhancement via property sales of vacant land that the district did not foresee needing now or in the future. And so throughout that time, the district in 2014 and 2015 did a review of a number of different properties. And at that time, the board and administration made the decision to move forward with the sale of property of Washington Elementary, and then subsequently Clay, and then the Nankin Skills Center and Perrinville properties. And with our conversations with the board, one of the topics that's risen continuously throughout both our budget discussions as well as just our maintenance of property discussion is what are the properties that we own, what are the properties that are vacant, current valuation, and as part of our fiduciary responsibility as a district and as a board, it is one of our largest assets. And so to have current information with regard to that valuation is also an important factor. And so the board had discussed with me and with our administration the idea that this is something that we should periodically review. That there is no desire, I don't believe, certainly not a recommendation from the district, and I don't believe a desire of the board to sell off all of the property that the district owns. So I want to make that abundantly clear. And one of the things that has been asked of us is to bring this up every couple of years so that we have the opportunity to determine whether or not in a future budget, we wanted to look at this as a revenue enhancement opportunity. Minimally, it gives us good information about the valuation of the property that we own, and we're able to do a cost analysis with regard to maintenance of that land and/or any vacant properties. So what we shared with you at our study session was a summary that Mr. Francis put together. And our question for the board at that time was whether or not you wanted us to engage once again with a real estate consultant, as the district has done a couple of times in the past, to take a look at specifically the properties that are non-used, non-leased properties within the district, and then bring that information back to the board for discussion throughout this year. And whether or not the board had any desire to move forward with consideration of different options for any of those properties, either now or in the future. So we bring that information to you this evening for your discussion and for your review, to answer any questions that you have, and then to get direction from the board whether or not you would like us to move forward with getting information on potential options and valuation of the properties, or if we'd like to just stay with this information at this time.
Mrs. Burke.
I am in favor of getting an update, as you've said, basically, of the value of our properties and those that the board may be interested in selling. Just as a quick clarification, we mentioned that Perrinville was one of the properties that was sold. At this table, we understand what we mean by Perrinville because that program has moved a few times. We're talking about the property, the triangular-shaped piece of property near Farmington Road and Ann Arbor Trail. We are not talking about, at this time, the old Adams Elementary School on Linden Street. So just if there was any confusion in the public listening to this conversation. But I am interested in seeing what the value of our properties are. I agree that I'm not interested in a wholesale sale of all of our properties that are not being utilized for K-12 right now, for a couple of reasons. I think once property is sold, it's sold, and it can't be regained. However, if we have an abundance of properties, as we have believed in the past that we had, that, as you appropriately put, Mrs. Oquist, are not being used now, and we do not foresee any time in the foreseeable future would be used again for K-12 LPS purposes, does it behoove this board to sell a few pieces of those properties? I also am not in favor of selling many because I believe that artificially inflates a budget in the income side. If we are looking at selling potentially a piece every couple of years, looking at that piece independently, I'm very much in favor of doing that. Every now and then, I'm asked, and I know other members of our board have been asked about specifically the Dickinson and the Bryant properties. Those are two that I'm not interested in selling because they are the two largest pieces of land that are vacant. And if we needed to go back and build another middle school or high school in the future, we would need property of that size in order to do it. Some of our elementary schools, the properties that they either sit on or have sat on, I'm more interested in taking a look at what the recommendation is on some of those properties.
Mr. Johnson.
I agree with Mrs. Burton, and I'd take it one step further because I think, particularly with regard to perhaps some of the smaller properties, we have the hidden costs of the maintenance, and it's not only from a time standpoint, but from an equipment standpoint as well. It puts additional stress on all of the equipment that we have. As we've found out this spring, particularly when the weather conditions are not conducive to it, you just can't get out there and maintain them. And then as is normal, we'll get complaints that they're overgrown and they don't look so good. So I think perhaps some of the smaller ones, I agree. I don't want a wholesale, sale of all of the properties. But I think some of the ones that we don't have a use for now and we don't foresee in the foreseeable future a use for, I think those perhaps may be ones that we want to take a look at. And I agree as well with the Dickinson and the Bryant properties. Those are pieces of property that, should we need to build on in the future, those are the ones that are of a size that we probably need to have. So I tend to agree.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. At this time, I'm not in any great rush to sell any property, but I do believe it's an asset, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to know the value of our assets. I always like to know how much my house is worth, but that doesn't mean I'm rushing out to put it on the market. So I would like to know what our land is worth, what our assets are worth. I do believe that Livonia is in the middle of a demographic shift. and that we may in the future need those. We might need additional schools as our population changes. So it's worth hanging on to the land for future use. And that might be quite a ways down the road, but as you've mentioned, when it's sold, it's sold. So yes, I'd like to investigate the value of the land and at least know what we have and what it's worth, and to start seeing what our future needs, in as much as it's possible to determine what those would be.
Great. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. I also agree with my cohorts here that I do think we need to take a look. I'd like to look and see what the value of the land is worth. Again, I wouldn't want to rush into sales unless we were truly sure we weren't going to be utilizing certain parcels, but I do think there are certain parcels that we do need to hold on to, maintain, like the Bryant Dickinson, but I think there are a few on this list that we could take a look at and say, are we truly going to need that piece of property? Is it large enough? Is it in a location where we might see a spark in population that we would want to keep it? Or is this an area where we think that we would be able to sell and utilize it that way? But I do also agree that it would be helpful to get some analyzation of the properties and take a look at that.
Mrs. Frank.
I also support looking at the properties and looking at where we are in terms of how much we own and what their value is. I think that is, as was stated, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers to utilize our assets well. And when you look at this list, we do have significant amount of property that we are not utilizing. It's already even been raised, so we don't even have to go through the cost of tearing down buildings. And so looking at this, I think, is in the best interest of us, although we don't want to artificially put some income into the school district. We do want to build our fund balance, and I think that that's what we've talked about. If we foresee that we're not going to be able to get another Wayne County enhancement millage, we've put a lot of things in place so far with that money. If it's not going to be renewable, having a little bit of room in our fund balance would be a wise thing. So I'm in full support of it.
Mrs. Bonnefield, would you like to voice something?
I'm all for everything.
You're good? All right.
I'm good. Yes, I agree with my colleagues that we need to evaluate the property, and I don't want my silence to be an indication that I disagree. Just don't have anything.
Yeah, okay. I also agree. I think I don't have much to add other than, it does, like Mr. Johnson said, holding on to properties and, for just an indefinite period and maintaining them forever may or may not be the best use of those properties. So giving each an individual look and doing our due diligence, I think, will be useful and enlightening. These past properties that we went through and we looked at before, it was very interesting to find out, what the grades were and if they were buildable. Some of them were not. So I think it's useful to know for not just this board, but future boards, where each of these properties lies and what the condition is and what the potential use is.
Let me say one more thing, Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Just want to emphasize that just because we as a board are giving direction to the administration to do the evaluation, that in no way, shape, or form means that we're going to decide to sell any of those properties, just so that everybody understands that. We may or we may not. It depends on a lot of different things, a lot of circumstances.
And we certainly would agree that moving very judiciously and carefully through this process is a necessity. And so because we don't have an immediate need next month or in the next few months, it does give us the opportunity to take a careful and thorough look. And it's also been approximately 4 years, probably by the time we have this process complete, closer to 5, since we've had some of these, this current valuation. And so it certainly makes sense to know the value of our assets and to have that as just one more piece of information. As you know, we do things like long-term facility planning. We have long-term look forward and look back on many different things in this district as part of our responsibility to you and to our community. And so we will simply move forward with looking into bringing to you an agreement to take a look at these properties and bring you information on value and potential uses. And certainly from there, as has been in the past, it would be a many-meeting discussion to determine if the board would choose to do anything further with that information once it's been received.
I'll make contact and just start the ball rolling to get the process going.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That concludes building and site.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. That takes us to item 4, Curriculum Committee, and I'll hand it over to Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Johnson. Our curriculum committee meeting tonight will encompass 4 different topics, all of which will be presented by Mrs. O'Brien.
Good evening.
The
Good
first
evening.
is our everyday mathematics journals.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight I am bringing you the annual request to purchase everyday mathematics student journals for use in our 1st through 5th grades and 6th grade at Webster. We have made a commitment to annually purchase the everyday math consumable student journals to support math instruction. This yearly expense is annually budgeted in the district's textbook account. Just to remind you, Everyday Math has a hardcover book, but it's much more of a resource. It's not the daily lesson book. This consumable is the lesson book. It has 3 parts to it: a piece that goes with the instruction for whole group, a piece to practice what they've learned that day, and then a piece that builds their skills and maintains their skills. So it practices math from the past, maybe something now, and then something to prepare them for the future. In kindergarten, our kindergarten teachers, when we moved to Everyday Math, decided that book didn't have enough of what they felt fit kindergarten. So our kindergarten teachers have worked over the years with Ms. Kaufman and Mr. Hillard and have created their own workbook that we produce in our printing department. So we don't purchase the Everyday Math kindergarten workbook. So the total cost for this student journals is $117,704.89. And that is for 4,751 student journals. We are getting 197 journals complimentary, so we are getting $4,515.24 in complimentary journals.
Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Bonnefield?
I know that Everyday Math has been updating for Common Core. Has the kindergarten Everyday Math Journal been reassessed along the way to determine whether or not it matches what the kindergarten teachers want to or need to teach? Has that been reassessed along the way to see if we want to go with the Everyday Math Journal, or has that just?
I can check with Mr. Hillard. I do not know.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Mrs. O'Brien, just as we would with any consumable, are we finding that the vast majority of our teachers are using the vast majority of content in this book?
So I think it's that way with any textbook. They don't always use every single lesson. I think as we've rolled out our priority standards, teachers know what we focus on in math, and some of the standards are not covered as deeply. So the expectation is that we use the textbook and teach all the lessons that are aligned to the standards, and they spend more time on the priority standards than they do the supporting standards. But I'm sure with any book, there's some that they don't. I think some of the pieces, so I checked when Mrs. Frank asked that question after study session, and one of the things Mr. Hillard said, a lot of the pieces that go with the instructional lesson, so it could be grid paper, it could be something to measure, that a lot of teachers might not use those pages because they've created some kinesthetic way for kids to do it in the classroom, to build something, to draw something, to measure something in the classroom, rather than measure shapes on a page. So they've made those adjustments to have kids do it in a much more constructive way.
Okay. Which kind of goes to my question of, are they using the majority of what's in there? I don't expect every single solitary page must be utilized, but.
Yes, it's
but the
expected that.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Then we'll move along to the next item.
This is going to be a voting item.
Oh, yes, please. Which is the purchase of Chromebooks and carts. Mrs. O'Brien?
Thank you. This evening, we are bringing a recommendation to purchase additional Chromebooks and carts using the 2013 bond for use in our middle and high schools. This purchase is to support the additional needs that our textbook adoptions have created. Currently, our schools are close to a 2-to-1 ratio, with academic departments sharing carts based on the size of their department, the number of courses that they teach. But as we have been adopting new textbooks, and we are finding that some of these resources are providing features in their online licenses that require students needing a Chromebook for every day for instruction. It's no longer just a copy of the book online. They have resources and experiences that the students can't get through a hard textbook. And we believe it will help our students, provide them a better opportunity to learn the concepts that we're asking them to learn. Our new world language textbook that we approved is one of the examples of that. There is like a daily newspaper, like in our elementary schools we have Scholastic News or Time for Kids. So there are newspapers that are aligned with current events in the languages that they're taking, Spanish or French. And that way then students have the experience of something they may know something about, what's going on in the world, but they're reading about it in the language that they're learning. And so it's updated and live and a part of their instruction. And another one is, another textbook that we'll be talking about later tonight is the National Geographic for our middle school social studies. It also has opportunities online that are in addition to what we provide in the textbook. So our recommendation is to purchase 9 additional carts of Chromebooks with 36 in a cart for each high school, and then an additional charging cart so that high schools have some flexibility that if they aren't fully using a cart in some areas, they could pull some of the Chromebooks off and create another cart. So that gives them some additional flexibility. And then 5 additional carts at our middle schools. So this will be a total of 1,450 additional Chromebooks and 42 additional charging carts. These Chromebooks are the ones that we bought in the last round. So they are, this is Mr. Clan's word, ruggedized, spill-proof keyboard, and the Gorilla Glass screen. And overall, we have been very happy with the performance and the reliability of these devices. And these are the ones that swing all the way around and can be like a tablet. So the total for this purchase is $517,312. And the funds for this purchase would be included in the technology portion of the 2013 bond.
Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Just a quick question. On the Chromebooks, when there's an issue with a Chromebook, how is that rectified in the classrooms? Like, let's say, is there somebody in the building that looks at those, or are they sent out? Where do they go for repair or any type of need like that if they are broken?
So our IT department, there's a help ticket process that a teacher puts in a help ticket. There's also usually the library media specialist or someone in the building who could help. I might help my partner if she says this one's not working. The charging station, you have to slide the Chromebooks in a certain way and then it's an easy charge. And you know, if a kid puts it in the other way and it's not working. So just those simple checks are there, but then we put in a help ticket to our IT department and they contact us and find out if they will pick it up or if someone comes to check it out.
And do we know if we've had a lot of repairs that have had to go out, or anything of that nature, or they've worked really well, or how long does it take to get them back? I mean, is it efficient process? I just asking. Yeah.
I think they are doing the best that they can. I think it's as efficient as with the number of people that we have. But each cart has additional Chromebooks right now. So there's 36 and we don't have that many in our classes. So there's, a few extras so that if they need to be sent out. But I also can ask Mr. Clan about the number that have needed repairs. If you think about it, most of these are less than 3 years old. So
hopefully,
it would be the accidental drops and things like that, but the life of them shouldn't be that.
Thank you.
But we'll follow up in an update.
Okay,
with you.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments? President Jensen.
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yeah.
did I hear you say that our ratio is almost 2 to 1 now?
It's just slightly under that.
And over what grade levels is that? Is that all grade levels?
District-wide.
District-wide, okay. And will this, I'm assuming these purchases will help perhaps bring that closer to a one-on-one?
Well,
I wouldn't say significantly, but.
Right, because the intent with the bond purchase and the way that it was first costed out, and the intent of the district at the time when the bond was first passed, the intent was not to have one-to-one mobile devices, but to have devices available each day for students to utilize as appropriate and as integrated into the curriculum. What we found, as Mrs. O'Brien shared at the secondary level, is there are certain departments where the resources available really require that those teachers have a cart available to them pretty much all day, every day, for each of their classes as they come through. Now, that's not the case for every department and for every classroom. And so our intent at this time is not necessarily to move to a one-to-one, but to have computers available for each student as they move through some of those subject areas. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So perhaps for those subject areas, we want all of the students to be able to have access to a Chromebook. And so right now, that need has grown as we've been able to do these most recent textbook adoptions, and the access to material and extended learning that can take place online is really quite exciting and something our teachers want to take advantage of. And so what we want to do is to beef up the availability at the middle school and high school level, and then continue to assess. I really like the option that Mrs. O'Brien and the IT folks are bringing forward. You see in the center, there are carts with charging customization kits. So those are simply empty carts with the holders for each of the Chromebooks to be charged. So where there may be 36 Chromebooks on every cart, but perhaps throughout a department, there aren't more than 29 students in a class. That would leave about 7 off of that cart available. And if you take that from 4 or 5 classes, you've now created an additional cart available for use. And so that's the type of flexibility. So rather than simply buying additional carts at 36 per, the cart itself is much cheaper, but gives some flexibility. And so what we're doing is trying that out at our middle schools and our high schools to see if that makes sense as another way to really maximize the use of the Chromebook. So it's exciting because what you want to do is you want that need to come before the devices. And so what we've certainly started with building that over the past 3 years and bringing those mobile devices in, and this is exactly what we hope to see. Clamoring for more of those devices with very specific needs and purposes. And that's really the best, rather than simply putting thousands of these into a school and not having necessarily an immediate purpose or use. So we're really trying to make use of every last dollar as carefully as possible, especially as we get closer to the end of the bond. So this is another nice large purchase, purchase number 4, and then we'll go back and reassess at the K4 and the 5-6 level as well, and continue to move forward with those devices.
Mrs. Byrne, you had a question?
Just on the dollar end, again, for folks who may not be listening from home, this is bond dollars that we're spending, so this is dollars that we cannot use for salaries and for personnel and so forth. This is specifically for this type of thing. And Mrs. O'Brien, I assume that this is within our technology budget, still a portion of the bond?
Yes, it
Okay.
is. Does not bring us over what we have
Okay,
budgeted.
great. All right, thank you.
Other questions or comments? I have one, Mrs. Bonnefield, please.
So I know when we originally discussed bringing in the mobile devices and not having a one-on-one ratio, that we also had the opportunity, I think we called it bring your own device, that the students still have the opportunity, if they wish, to be able to use their own device in order to access the same information that they might access on a Chromebook. So that also assists on bringing it to a closer one-on-one ratio without having the district maintain a one-on-one ratio. Is that still true?
I believe that's been a school-by-school decision.
That's what I was going
And
to say.
so I don't want to say that across the board at every school.
Okay.
We certainly have a bring-your-own-device policy
Okay.
that schools are able to access and utilize. So in some cases, that may be a smartphone.
Okay.
And in some cases, that may be an iPad. But that is determined by department, by school.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you for that information.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I just wanted to say that having a one-to-one policy, a ratio of one-to-one, which is to say one electronic device per student, sounds like a reasonable goal. However, that assumes 100% usage 100% of the time, and that is not a reasonable goal. So what we need to strive for, rather than one-to-one, is enough. As long as we have enough for any given class who needs to use electronic devices, to have access to those devices, to have them charged and ready, then we are handling that particular technological asset correctly. So kudos to you for handling our technological assets correctly.
Thank you.
And we can move on to the
Voting.
next,
Voting?
oh, yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay.
The next item, which is item C, iReady Diagnostic and Instructional Licenses. Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you again, Mrs. Jarvis. I would like to recommend the purchase of our iReady Diagnostic and Instructional Licenses in both reading and mathematics for the 2018-19 school year. Currently, we have elementary students assessed 3 times a year, and our teachers utilize the results in order to determine how students are performing and what their instructional needs may be. These assessments provide teachers with specific information about a student's strengths and weaknesses compared to their grade level standards. Last year, iReady was an approved assessment by the state of Michigan as an initial determination of whether a student is at grade level for the 3rd grade reading bill. For this year, all students through kindergarten through 8th grade will be taking the assessment 3 times a year. The diagnostic also provides all of our teachers with targeted lessons to support students' areas of weakness. So this year at the secondary, we will be administering iReady Diagnostics in both reading and math to all students. As a part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, we require a formalized multi-tiered system of support and an assessment to say whether a student is at or below grade level. So we have decided to use iReady. Many of our middle schools have been using instructional licenses for some of their student support classes. And so all students will now take the diagnostic 3 times a year, just like our elementary students. And then in addition, we are purchasing 600 instructional licenses for targeted elementary and secondary students. So in summary, we are purchasing 8,400 iReady Reading and iReady Math licenses for K-8 students and 600 instructional licenses for targeted students at elementary. The funds to purchase iReady Diagnostic and Instructional Licenses are available through our Academic Services Department budget. We use 31A at-risk state grant funds, and there has been early literacy assessment grants. So in the past, just in my year and a half in this job, I've applied for that grant twice, and it will be open again this fall. So there's grant monies to support computer diagnostic assessments. So the Michigan Department of Education is supporting the use of these. They have required them as a part of third grade reading bill and then have put in grants for us to apply for. So I anticipate receiving grant funds to support the cost of our assessments. So our total cost for this year's purchases is $105,120. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mrs. Bernie?
Mrs. O'Brien, do you remember what the dollar amount, or close to dollar amount of the early literacy grant was?
I want to say, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Could you just get it to us?
Mrs.
Next-
Smith is looking that up, I can tell. By the look on her face, we'll have it shortly.
And was that a grant that was offered through the state of Michigan?
Yep.
Okay, so they're
Through the
encouraging
Michigan
its use.
Department of
Okay,
Education.
yep, MDE, okay.
Yes.
Okay. And you said we did get that grant twice and we're applying for the third time now? Okay, great.
The window's opening right now for fall for this year. You have to have you have to have already purchased it and prove that you purchased it, and then it's a reimbursement.
$198,000 we received this past year.
Okay. So, and that was the second time we had received it?
I'm really glad I did.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting that they have you purchase it, and then they will
It's a
assess whether or
reimbursement.
not they will reimburse you for it.
So, and they also start with a focus on K-3, and then if there are additional funds, then they support that, because they know that you're using
Okay.
typically the same diagnostic with all your elementary students, but as a part of the third grade reading bill,
Right,
it's
that's where
focused
they're
on
putting
your
it.
K-3 assessment first.
Okay,
And not all districts take the time to apply.
right.
And so if they have not, or if they're not using a state-approved assessment, so iReady is a state-approved assessment, but not all diagnostics are. So
Okay.
if they're not using a state-approved assessment, or if the district does not apply for that, then additional funds become available. And so that was the case, we were able to garner additional dollars for that.
Okay, great. As we've said with many topics, and we've said it tonight, thank you to you and your department for being on top of things like this and making sure you're acquiring all the funds that are there to acquire.
Our pleasure to do that.
Mrs. O'Brien is very busy in grant writing mode this summer. Has applied
So
for a
glad.
number of grants through MDE and through the state to support our literacy coaches, instructional coaches, the assessments, and most recently, some other leadership and literacy development. So she has been very busy with grant writing.
I would love to see whatever grants you're able to acquire, bring that to the board, because we'd love to make that public. Not only do we have fabulous staff, but we have fabulous staff who are going out of their way to supplement our budget, and that's really appreciated.
As I hear about each one, I will share.
Please do.
For sure.
Thank you.
For sure.
Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Again, thank you, Mrs. O'Brien, for all your hard work on this. I have a question on the total. You said the grand total is $105,120.
Yes.
And then I note that there's some days of professional development.
Yes, I see
That
that.
will be added on, so the total cost will be.
Correct, so I misspoke. So the licenses are $105,000, so if you look at my cover letter, the quote is attached. We put the $6,000 in professional development at the bottom.
Okay.
So iReady provides professional development, and each year we evaluate what our teachers need. This summer, they have revamped all of it, so it's kind of like iReady 2.0. And so we want to make sure that our iReady coaches are prepared to support their teachers, and our administrators know what the changes are. When I logged on just a couple days ago, the whole front dashboard is different for a teacher. The reports are very similar, so if I want to get my students' results, those look I know what says where, and that's good. But on the teacher dashboard page, it's different. And so they are actually coming tomorrow afternoon to give us a presentation about their updates so that we are able to share that. And then, so we purchased some professional development in order to make sure that our teachers are comfortable in using it to its fullest potential.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry, so the total cost is
$111,000.
$120,000. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
You're
sorry.
welcome. That's okay.
Mrs. Frank?
Just a quick question, is for the whole picture, what standardized tests are our kids taking right now? They're taking M-STEP and iReady, and then is there an additional standardized test, or how many tests are they taking, in a calendar year? I know that the high school does SAT and that sort of thing, but for our purposes, is that the only two?
So we give COGAT currently
Okay,
at 6th grade and 8th grade.
okay. But every year,
Third grade, not 3rd grade.
every year, it's just these two?
Every
It's just-
year, 3 times a year is iReady.
Yes.
M-STEP every spring.
Right.
And then any additional screeners or, grade level tests and math tests, those kinds of things. But, so the diagnostic gives you, the purpose of a diagnostic is to drill into what a child's strengths and weaknesses are. M-STEP is an assessment that tests their knowledge of the state standards.
Yes.
So that's the purpose of M-STEP. And then a nationally normed reference test like COGAT gets at more of the sub-skills, the quantitative and qualitative skills that students have.
So this would kind of be in place, probably really loosely, of like an NWEA?
An NWEA is very
Okay.
similar to iReady.
But we
Yes.
do not utilize that as well as this. This is in place of.
Right, we do not use NWEA.
It's a different vendor.
Okay.
So that's another vendor that is approved that you can utilize, or
But we
you
use-
wouldn't use both.
Okay, perfect. And then are our results accurate? Are they helpful? Have the teachers, where are we on the utilization of this?
So they used it more last year than previously with the 3rd grade reading bill, right?
Mhm.
So we use it to identify kids at grade level. If they're below grade level, what are their skill deficits? iReady provides lessons, so that's not the instructional online piece, but just the diagnostic gives teachers lessons of what they need to do in order to fill the holes. It tells you right in order, do these things, these things. So one of the benefits that having instructional coaches and literacy coaches this year is that they've been able to work with teachers to drill down and then take those lessons and flesh them out and help them progress monitor, how to use them as an intervention. So our teachers are using the pieces that come with iReady more than we have in the previous 2 years when we have started using that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. O'Brien? This is, as you say, a program we've been using for several years now. So this license renewal is an annual renewal. Is this something that our students use only at school, or can they use it at home as well?
So the diagnostic portion is a 3 times a year assessment. There are additional assessments students can take at school. A teacher can assign them a standard mastery test. So if we're working on informational standard 2 at any grade level, there's standard mastery and there's 2 versions. So you could do a pre-test before you do a unit and a post-test. So iReady provides those to our teachers. The instructional online piece is the piece they can access at home. So for our students that are assigned an instructional license, there's practice, the online practice, that's based on how they did on the diagnostic, that adjusts based on their practice. So if my weakness is in addition, and it showed that in diagnostic, and I'm assigned an instructional license, I'm part of the student supports, then I'm going to get lessons anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. They're looking for 45 minutes a week of practice, and it adjusts up or down based on how I do on that. And that can be done during school or at home.
So there's a lot of flexibility.
There is.
That sounds good. Any other questions or comments?
Voting?
Yes, please. Then to our last item, which is the middle school social studies textbook recommendations.
Thank you again. I would like to introduce Christine Benkel. She's our Language Arts and Social Studies Coordinator. She's been working throughout this past school year with teams of middle school teachers to evaluate their curriculum, research best practice, create a vision for teaching and learning in social studies, and evaluate new materials, and selecting the best choices with the funds that you have allocated towards these new materials. So Christine's here this evening to kind of share a little bit about how the committee work went.
Absolutely. I want to take some time to walk you through the process that we use to get to where we are today, where we can propose some textbooks for your consideration. So to start with, I worked with a group of 7th grade teachers and a group of 8th grade teachers. And in the beginning, we identified the need to consider some textbooks for adoption based on the fact that it was different for 7th and 8th grade. For 7th grade, they had a shift in their curriculum. So that in the past, their curriculum was focused on world geography, and the shift was towards world history in order to align with our state standards. So I've been working with the 7th grade group for 3 years now, and they started with, understanding the shift in the standards, and then with looking at a free curriculum that's available in our state called the MC3 curriculum for social studies. This is a great curriculum, but it doesn't provide a lot of text support in order to really do that integration with reading in the social studies classroom. So their need really came from a shift in their curriculum. For 8th grade, they have, their last textbook adoption was 20 years ago. So they've had the same textbook for a long time. U.S. history maybe hasn't changed a lot, but certainly there are a lot of changes in instructional praxis and in our standards. They do not yet have a fully developed free curriculum like the 7th grade. That's been in the works and ongoing for it's grant funded, so it's taken place over the last few years. So they're really in need of an update as well. They're proposing, even though I met with them separately, they came to the same conclusion that National Geographic Learning provided the best resource to support the curriculum. And so you can see these two titles. We have for 7th grade, World History, Great Civilizations, and for 8th grade, American Stories Beginning to 1877. So we began to meet. We'd identified those as reasons, and then we chose to recommend these, which include not just the purchase of textbooks, but also an online component. So they are also moving into a digital world with this purchase, and they're very excited about that. So the teachers have recommended that we get text sets for their classroom. So we're moving away from every child having a textbook, and so that the textbook would be available in the classroom. The digital version of the text would be available inside and outside of the classroom, and there would also be extra text so that students with an IEP plan who need that opportunity, or any student who just has that preference may choose to check it out and take it home. But it would be going back and forth from home to school to keep a complete set in the classroom. The basic details on the summary of the courses that we're in the process of creating curriculum for is that there's an overarching praxis that we want to include in the social studies classroom, which really creates inquiry as a foundation. And so we really want to make sure that we're starting with inquiry, and that then within that we're inserting the social studies disciplines, and then that leading to the integration of literacy skills with research, writing, and then presenting or taking action. So that's the C3 framework that is named in our proposed state standards and current best practices in the social studies classroom. As far as their content, both are heavy in history. For the 7th grade course, they start at the beginning, it's world history, and they go to the 1500s. And then for 8th grade, they start in 1754 and go through 1877. So that's kind of the time periods that are being covered in the course of their school year. In evaluating the textbooks, we began by identifying a vision, and because I met with them separately, they have unique visions, but there are a lot of similarities between the two. They both really value inquiry, and we spend a lot of time with that C3 framework to kind of think about like how that's going to really frame the teaching that takes place in the classroom. Engagement was also really important. And critical thinking, getting them ready for the 21st century, and then just having rich resources so that there's a variety of ways to learn in the classroom. A couple of features with this particular textbook, the online portion includes video clips that that feature somebody in the field. So, for example, an archaeologist, really making links to the historical time period. So those are fabulous, and then you just can't beat National Geographic for the photographs. They're just stunning. They're just amazing. And so they really do draw students in. It gives them a lot to question when they look at a photo and think about time. So those are kind of the commonalities that the visions had. We looked at 5 different publishers. We looked at TCI, which is History Alive. We looked at McGraw-Hill, Pearson, and then National Geographic Learning. And through the process, we used several steps in evaluating the resources using the standards to glean a closer look, and then also to look at how the course, the book develops over time. And the decision of the committee based on the rubrics was 2 front runners, Pearson and National Geographic Learning. Both grades spent some time piloting those products, and then really were went into it with very much an open mind and unsure of which way they were going to go. But they both came back to National Geographic in the end, and that was based on their experience with the text as well as the student feedback. We have plans to go forward with the adoption this fall, pending your approval, and that would begin the year with professional development provided by National Geographic, and then we would continue that professional development during the school year. Did you talk already a little bit about the audio, or? Nope. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about that then. We've been working very closely with National Geographic, and during the pilot, our teachers identified at 7th grade a glitch with the audio, and it had to do with an update that occurred, and so our team was like the first aware of a problem that occurred because of another software update that occurred. So they are in the process of fixing that. Of course, we wouldn't want to go forward with, signing on the dotted line with a purchase until that is fixed. The National Geographic is working with another vendor who supports them with the audio portion, and any day we should have a resolution. So we're really hopeful that that's going to happen, and that we'll really feel that our product is something that we want to sign on the dotted line for. Are there any questions? Mrs. Burton?
You mentioned the phrase "start with inquiry."
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So in many cases, what we want to do is to pique students' interest and really hook them in to the learning. So one example, you could have a question such as, what is an empire? That's something that is a question in the MC3 curriculum. And so, students begin by just like opening it up to questions and really, telling what they know, but also thinking about what they want to know, what they want to investigate in order to find out more about empires. There's definitely an openness to it, but also it's facilitated to provide structure that leads towards the content.
And that's kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
It's exciting to have inquiring minds, but some of our inquiring minds don't necessarily want to know.
Yes.
And we need to prod them along down the road that we want them to go
Yes.
down. So
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that.
The resource actually gives questions, and those are essential starting points. And then there are also a lot of other resources out there that we're looking at, and one that I thought was very compelling that would really draw students in, as another example, it was Valley Forge. You're a soldier. Are you going to stay or are you going to go? You know, and really beginning to think about the war from the position of the soldier. So
Okay.
very engaging when you can pose inquiry in that way and really draw students into the content. But yes, it starts with the content.
Okay. I noticed too, when you were talking about what periods in time were covered, it seems like there's, now granted, we can't teach everything in 2 years, but there's a gap between we leave off in the 1500s in 7th grade, we jump into the 1700s in 8th grade, if I caught the dates correctly.
Well, one is world history
Okay,
and the other is U.S. history.
okay,
Okay, and then when you look at the standards in our state are developed so that really U.S. history starts in 5th grade. So
Okay.
the previous time period has been covered in 5th grade, and then it continues in high school. So U.S. history is inserted into the curriculum at 3 different grade levels: elementary, middle, and high
Okay.
school. And then for world geography, they're really starting at the beginning, right? And there is a world geography course in 6th grade. So they're doing a lot to become familiar with the geography and beginning to think about a lot of what they do is really making those connections to the 4 disciplines through a study of world geography. And then there's a high school course in world history as well, so they pick up in 9th grade to continue. So there is a continuous.
okay. And that's what I was getting at, is
Period.
where are we picking up some of the pieces that are not
Good
in this
question.
one? Okay. And then, are we looking at these books, assuming that they figure out their glitch with the audio, when are we looking at actually having these in our district?
We're hoping to have them in for fall.
For this fall?
Yes,
Because
yes.
they got to get on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they're feeling a lot of pressure. I
Good.
called them, I got very good response today when I said I was coming to the board meeting. Everybody was answering all my calls. But I'm pretty confident that, because it's not just us, this isn't
Right.
nationally.
Absolutely.
Everybody, in
Sure.
7th grade is going to be wanting to start the year with audio.
Right, they don't want to postpone all their sales for another whole year.
Right, and so they are beginning to lay the groundwork for our digital platform. And so I hope that we begin the year minimally with that, and that the textbooks arrive as soon as possible.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
So, in this shift of textbooks from hardcover to online, our experience has been that you buy the textbooks and you get the online for free, or you buy the online and you get the textbook for free. Now, you mentioned with this purchase that we're limiting the number of hardcover texts, and then every child will have the opportunity to have an online license.
Yes.
So can you talk maybe a little bit about how that structure may be changing and the difference in the costs between?
Yeah.
So in our experience, I would say,
Yeah.
well, we might as well just get all the textbooks because they're free.
Right, right.
And so if you could just address
Sure.
that for us. And
Sure. And that is, it varies from vendor to vendor, but in this case, there was a $15 difference per student to purchase the online portion separately. So what we've done is, based on the number of textbooks that we want, we purchased a bundle. So for that number of textbooks, we get as a bundle both the digital and the print text. And then for the additional online license, it's $15 less per student to get just the online portion. So
Very
it was a
nice.
significant savings.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, thank you.
So for example, at 7th grade, it's 405 textbooks with the digital access, and then 620 digital access.
So it'd be 620 times $15 is our savings. Yep. Thank you so much.
And one other thing, I had mentioned earlier that there were 2 glitches that they were working on, the audio. The other glitch that they, and it was the 8th grade world history, they had a lot of interactive online work for students to do, to be able to submit to their teacher electronically, but it was not in the Google platform. And so Ms. Finkel talked to them and said, we are a Google world, and we tried some of the documents, and they were not fillable forms for our students. So they spent the summer adapting all of those things and moving them over to Google for us. So that particular fix, they did meet what we have asked in time for school. But the audio, which seems to be a secondary, not Nat Geo, but whoever's providing that for them, they have said this week that we should, but it was not today, so.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mrs. Finkel and Mrs. O'Brien. I appreciate your reports. And President Johnson, that concludes the curriculum
Mrs.
committee.
Jarvis, we are voting on this?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Thank you, Mrs. Finkel. Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you.
That takes us to item 5, Finance Committee, Mrs. Bonnefield.
I do not have anything on our agenda. Mrs. Smith or Superintendent Elquist?
We do not.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. That'll take us to item 6, Policy Committee, Mrs. Burton.
I don't have anything for this evening.
We
Mrs.
do not,
Elvis?
President
Nope.
Johnson.
Very good. That takes us to item 7, Personnel Committee, Mrs. Frank.
We do not have anything? Correct?
That's correct.
Very good. That moves us to our last item, item 8, Legislative, Mrs. Bradford.
Oh, I don't think we have anything. Do we, Mrs. O'Quist?
We don't. We covered a few items, important items in our study session. We'll continue to follow through on those and
Monitor
update
those.
the board as appropriate.
Okay, well, there you have it.
Well, there we have it. All right, we've
How
come
does
to the
that
end of
happen?
our agenda in almost record time tonight.
Record time.
Thank you
Efficient.
for all the presentations, and hopefully you'll tune in or come to see us next week at our voting meeting. So tonight, we are done. Thank you.
Yes.